Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with John Baker about the role of introversion in meetings, teams, and leadership. John Baker, welcome back to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Hi, great to be back here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. We were just talking, and I think it was a little over a month ago that we had our last conversation where we focused on the role of introversion within organizations and how organizations can better maximize and leverage the unique talents and skills that introverts bring to the table to make the organization stronger and more competitive. We're going to continue that conversation today, but we're going to zoom in a little bit and we're going to focus on the role of introversion in meetings specifically, and really how that connects with teams and how leaders better facilitate those meetings and those team dynamics, understanding that we have different personality types and we have certainly extroverts, but we have lots of introverts and probably more introverts. And people along the spectrum more that direction. And so we need to know how to better manage that and lead that in order to maximize, positive, healthy cultures and team dynamics and help our meetings to be more successfour. As we get started.
Sounds good.
Yeah, great. As we get started, John, I just wanted to share your bio with everyone again, in case they didn't catch our last episode. Driven by his desire to expose the talent of quieter business people, John Baker has become known for activating introverts. With his quietly confident attitude to challenges and vision of balanced teams, alongside his enthusiasm for action and helping others, John inspires business leaders to take action. Balanced teams allow introverts and extroverts to flourish individually and as a team, improving productivity, creativity, and diversity of thought. His business growth and networking knowledge, where he's written multiple books on the subject, combined with leadership experience, allows John to show leaders how to change their habits and get more from their introverts. He's probably the only speaker who believes you don't need to keep your head above water to succeed. He spends his spare time underwater. Scuba diving has provided fun in many tight spots. Expect diving stories that help you change your thinking about real life issues. And I'm counting on that this time, John. I want to hear a little bit more diving in relation to our conversation, just because I'm so fascinated by it, and I really have almost no experience myself in relation to
we'll have to fix
diving.
That then.
I know we should fix it. I've done a little bit of snorkeling. I've never done scuba diving. Anyways, great to have you back. Before we launch into the conversation, anything else you would like to share by way of background or context?
No, I think that's you've done a very good job around the background. Thank you. And perhaps the context piece I'll just put in there, which is where my piece on meetings came from. Because quite a few people say to me, John, you've specialised in introversion. Why have you written a book about meetings? And I think that's a good question. And the answer to me is quite simple. Many of the issues that we talked about last time, ones that create issues within organisations, really come to a head along with lots of the communication and culture in meetings, in businesses. And those meetings are generally critical to drive things forwards, to make sure everybody's aligned. And yet we all know they go badly wrong. Hence why there's so many jokes about how terrible meetings are. So I thought that would be a really good place to start. But also, part of the same research showed me that a large amount of the people that are not fully engaged in the meetings, guess what, are the introverts. And then you get to, well, why not? And it's those same behaviors. So it is about exploring behaviors that can change the way we run meetings so they make things happen.
Yeah, and we all have had way too many experiences of going to really ridiculously ineffective meetings, and the amount of time that we spend, and frankly, the amount of time we waste often during our workday in these meetings that just don't accomplish much of anything. And so, I think it's always important to come back to how do we run meetings more effectively as a leader, an organizational leader. How do I lead and facilitate meetings? But also from the standpoint of interpersonal and team dynamics within those meetings. And a piece of that, of course, is the personality piece, and the introvert extrovert spectrum. And we have people that fall all along that continuum. And if we want our meetings to be successful, we need to involve everybody, right? Not just the loudest people who are the first to always share their input. So I know that's where all of this came from for you, and that's what we're going to dig into more today. So as we get started, let's talk a little bit more specifically about the difference that we often see within meetings between introverts and extroverts, or people who fall further along the continuum on either side. And then we can get more into the mechanics of what an effective team meeting will actually look like.
Okay, so I think one of the first things most people that run businesses, run meetings, have said to me when I've stopped and chat to them, I'm sure it's the same with you, John, is that every meeting they've got, every team they've ever managed has got 3 or 4 people that just never, ever shut up. And equally, 2 or 3 that never speak up. And they've never actually connected the fact that, well, if I dealt with those, these one would speak up more. And again, that's really what's playing into this whole issue. Underpinning this, a lot of things, is a couple of the traits of introversion, which we spoke of last time. So number one is this: introverts tend to de-energize when they're with lots of people. That's what I call the people energy, just fizzes away like an old mobile phone. The other one is the internal processing versus external processing. So an introvert typically will think to talk, ask a question, thinks for a moment, out come the words. An extrovert will talk to think. So ask a question, words come flying back. They're not necessarily a complete answer because they are in the thought process. Whereas the introvert is silently trying to go, let me come up with the most complete, the most concise, the most well-structured answer I possibly can. The extrovert's coming out with words in the process of forming their answer. Now, that's all very well until you sit there and get into meetings, because then at that point, open the question up and whoomph, the extrovert starts talking, and the introverts by and large are not going to bother jumping in at that point. And so, okay, I'll sit quietly. And then you add to some of that some of the other behaviors we often see in meetings where, for example, it's the Monday meeting. What's the purpose of the Monday meeting? It's just the Monday meeting, don't ask. And everyone troops into a Monday meeting expecting, actually, let's be honest, they don't expect great things because they've been to the Monday meeting for as long as they have and nothing ever happens. But people walk out going, what was that all about? So I think there's a number of things that go on. So first of all, I always sit there and say, why are you having a meeting? If you want to make better meetings, why are you even bothering? If all you really want to do is to tell something, you want to pass information on, in other words, it's one direction, why not put it on an email, or even do what we're doing here, just record a short video. Boom, out it goes. Everybody's got exactly the same message. Everybody's saved themselves time. You've saved time. Job done. But no, we insist on pulling everybody into a meeting. Everyone travels. Yeah. They sit there for an hour or two, and they're perplexed about what they're meant to do about this. They receive some information, and job done. So what's the purpose? If the purpose of the meeting is to get the team together, to get the team to discuss something, whatever the something is, so you can come up with a solution, then you really do want a buy-in from the whole team, because unless you've got everybody contributing, you're going to end up with what many people will call groupthink, where 2 or 3 voices steer the meeting or steer the conversation, and everyone goes trotting off in this direction. Great, and everyone feels good. Yeah, we're getting somewhere. It's a bit like times when I've been underwater, where There's a particular lake that I often dive in, and there's times when you go that it's crystal clear, but at other points it's as murky as hell. I have to say, it's got a clay bottom and it just floats around. And now I've got to the point where over the years I can jump in and go, yeah, if I go that way, I'll get to the shipwreck. But there's times when you kind of think, yeah, right, off you go. It's that way. And you go herring off and everyone feels good because you're heading in the same direction. And then you keep going and you miss the shipwreck altogether and you get to the back end of the lake and you go, well, where are we? Whereas if you sometimes stop, take your time. Okay, well, I think it's more that way. Oh, no, there's that rock there. We've got to pass that rock and then we're in the right direction. You take your time and you're going to get to somewhere because you work together. So the first thing I would say is set a purpose, set a clear purpose that everyone understands, and only bother with the meeting if you really do want the whole team to discuss matters. And if you want the whole team to discuss matters, then it follows you've got to structure it so they all can.
Yeah. That seems so obvious. Yet it so rarely happens. I think I might have mentioned this last time that, the vast majority of the meetings I go to don't even send out, they don't even send out an agenda in advance at all, let alone,
the very next thing I was going to raise, to be honest. It's so we come back to this internal, external processing thing. And we know that we want the quieter ones to speak up a bit more, but then we dump a load of information on them. And the extroverts, and I always remember back the first ever, it was the first day in my second ever proper job. So it's quite a while ago now. And I was sitting in this meeting and I was slightly nervous because it was my first day. But there's about 20 people in this team. And there's 3 or 4 that never shut up. And every time the boss asked a question, they would come out with this stuff. At the very beginning of the meeting, he had handed around a wodge about an inch thick, piles of paper with data on it that we were all meant to be discussing. They hadn't seen the data, but they were still firing answers in. And you've got other people who were quietly looking through the data and trying to work out what on earth's going on. But their comments bore no resemblance to the data because they were just in the process of talking. So again, if you're going to have people to actually process the information and then speak, get them that information early. So we've always been told, send the agenda out early. It makes sense. Of course it makes sense. But now let's think about why. Because if you don't, a third of your team, the introverts, ain't going to really have a chance to participate.
Yeah. Well, and it comes back to, it's connected to your first point as well. If you have a clear purpose for the meeting, that will be spelled out in the agenda, right? And so you have a stated purpose and objective. You have, what's going to be discussed in the meeting, and you provide that in advance. And it's a primer. It gives people a chance to think and to prepare, and then they can come and you can have a working meeting and get things done. When that doesn't happen, one of two things. Well, either the meeting probably doesn't even need to be a meeting because, like you said, it's just a one direction, like sharing information, record a video, send an email. You don't even need to have a meeting. Or you end up having something that you intend to be a working meeting that is completely dysfunctional and derailed from the very beginning because people aren't prepared and you only get the vocal ones to speak out immediately, and you don't have good thinking occurring. And so it's not complicated. It really is quite simple, but you have to be committed to it. You have to be committed to having a clear stated objective and purpose for the meeting, sharing that with your people, in part, by having an agenda in advance so that people can prepare. And that those two things alone, if you can do those two things consistently, it's going to vastly improve the quality of your meetings. And chances are you'll probably cut your meetings in half because you'll realize that there's no point in even holding this meeting. I was actually really impressed last week because I had it's like a weekly staff meeting with this one area that I'm involved with, and we meet every week at this time, and the person's really good at getting an agenda out. So I really appreciate that. This particular week, she didn't get the agenda out in advance. And while I would have preferred that she'd done this a little bit sooner, to her credit, she just canceled the meeting. She just said, you know what? Sorry, it's my fault. I didn't get this out in advance. I'm just going to send an email. I'll share some of the things I thought we could talk about. Let's cancel the meeting. Everyone gets an hour back to their day. And I'm like, brilliant. Yay. That's so rare. How many, and you know, it was vulnerable on her part to just admit it. Nobody thought bad of her. That we actually were all very appreciative. But how many times do leaders not want to look weak or unprepared? And so they just plow into a stupid meeting that isn't serving any real purpose, because they can't just admit that, you know what, they didn't do their due diligence in preparing people in advance. And now they're just wasting everybody's time. I've sat through so many meetings like that. I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership: Ordinary, Everyday Actions that Produce Extraordinary Results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life.
And then the other thing, because you mentioned a moment ago that that first of all, getting the agenda out could well cut down the amount of meetings you go to. It could also cut down the amount of time in a meeting, because if you stick to that agenda, you get rid of a lot of the other nonsense. And that's when I come back to the other piece that I talk about, which is hold back. If you want the quieter ones to speak up, you have to hold back the noisier ones. Now, that, again, sounds absolutely obvious. And I'm going to relate it back to a diving story, which is to me is obvious, but it wasn't to this person. So there I am under the water, about 30 meters under the water, and we're swimming along across a sandy kind of seabed, and we're in Egypt, and I'm swimming along with my buddy, and about 20 meters ahead of us we see this guy, and he's lying on the floor of the sea. First thing I thought, a bit odd, bit of a nothing, but and then I saw he's alive because he's waving his arm, he's holding his arm out, and he's just wiggling his fingers up and down. This is very strange. But then we saw what was happening. What he was doing, every time he stopped wiggling his fingers, there's these 4 lionfish, and they were kind of really interested, and they'd creep in another couple of inches, and then he'd wiggle his fingers, and they'd stay there, and they'd creep in like this. And we're just watching this in amazement that's going on. But as you don't dive, John, there's probably one thing which you don't know about lionfish. They're covered all over in, it's like great big tentacles, really frilly, colourful, amazing things to watch. But, and here's the but, all of these frilly fronds around them are poisonous. And what they do, they touch their prey and they immobilise it, and then of course they can deal with it as they wish to. And so here he is, hands outstretched, trying to attract these things to him. It's like, oh my God, he didn't know what we knew. And so we're having to swim over as fast as we can. Hold back, hold back. And of course, it comes back to the same thing in meetings. If you don't know, if you don't think about it, it's not nearly as obvious, is it? And so because it's so easy to go along with, well, this is a great idea. These people just talking, great. Why aren't those ones talking? Because there's no space. Because these guys, you're training these people not to bother. Because in constantly praising the ones that talk a lot, and this happens quite often, brilliant, great idea, so pleased you came out with it really, really quickly. You're praising people to talk rubbish. And there was a session I was listening to the other day, and one person I know was told they should speak up more in meetings. And she said, well, I do when there's something to say. And he said, yeah, the points you make are really, really good, but I need you to speak up more. Well, I've made the points I've come to make. I've made the points that we agreed I was going to make. Well, I need you to speak a lot more. Why? Because unless you're speaking in the meetings, nobody will recognize you. Well, where's the logic in that statement? Because all it's doing is making a cacophony of noise.
Yeah, and it shifts the purpose. What's the purpose of the meeting? We have stuff that needs to get done, discussed, whatever, versus the purpose of the meeting is to get noticed by your boss, to, and it becomes this political game. Yeah. And is that really what we want in our meetings, is just to have political one-upsmanship and positioning happening? No, that's not what I want as a leader. I want people to speak when they have something meaningful to say. I want everyone to feel safe, that they can contribute, and that they're encouraged to contribute. I want it to be a functional and meaningful, culture and dynamic within my team and within the meetings that we hold, so that we, like you said, so we don't have groupthink, so that we can have better thinking, so we can be more creative, more innovative, and that we can get things done. I don't want people playing political games in a meeting, trying to look good and make other people look bad, or take credit for ideas, or that's all garbage. We don't need to be doing that. It's a complete waste of time and energy.
Absolutely. And so steering away from that, stopping people from just talking for talking's sake. The hold back thing really is about leaders facilitating meetings, taking control of the meeting. That's the downside, of course. If you want a good meeting, somebody has to control it. And you can't just put people in a room and think good things will happen. Now, option one, of course, is the boss controls it. Great. Wouldn't it be better, if you want your whole team to engage more, though, if you took a step back as the boss and went, I want to, because if I'm running the meeting as the boss, I've got two things to think about. I've got the process of managing the meeting, and I've got to think about the content. But if I took a step back and went, I'm just going to concentrate on the content and get a different team member each time to run the meeting, now, as a boss, I'm far better off. And each time I've got a different team member engaged, I've got a slightly different style going in the meeting, and you never know what you will get is, especially introverts who tend to be very good at facilitating meetings. Introverts are great listeners. One of the great points about that is a good listener can listen to that bit of conversation. If they're in charge of the meeting, they okay, let me just summarize that and listen. And because they've listened, introverts tend to be very good at summarizing. Now, with that summary, the facilitator or the boss can then go, okay, and move the meeting back into the right direction, or move the meeting on to the next step, whatever it might be. But by getting other people to run the meeting, you're going to engage more anyway. You're going to end up with a better result overall, both for you as the boss, because, hey, I can just think about the issues now, as well as the whole team are going to get more engaged. So I think one of the things that works well is that. And one other quick one on the facilitating ones that I've seen some teams use really, really well. One of the issues that's happening now, and I don't know about where you are, John, but in the UK, we've now got some teams starting to head back into the office. And so they're in the office for their meeting, and you've got the rest of the team still out working from home. And so you've got what I would call a hybrid meeting. And of course, the ones that are out working from home are on, they're not getting as much bandwidth as the people in the room, because the people in the room can wink at each other, they can pass each other notes, and the communication happens a lot faster in the room than between the people remotely, as well as then you've got to stop, they've got to hear you, and the transmission thing. One of the things that some teams are doing really well, they've got one facilitator that's concentrating on the overall meeting, and one person that's just focusing on the eye movements and the needs of the people that are remote. And that way they can say to the co-facilitator, if you like, oh, so-and-so needs to make a point. And then they can structure the meeting around that in a relevant way. I think it's important to go. Hybrid meetings can be really good, but they do put on another layer of complexity. But we can deal with that if we want to make it work.
Yeah, and those were both really great suggestions. I would encourage people to explore. Sharing the responsibility for meeting facilitation, sharing, spreading that around, giving people a turn, giving people different roles within the team in a meeting, in it, and letting them know that in advance so they can prepare for it. That's another really great way to keep people involved. It's also a good way to, I mean, in a sense, you're cross functionally training people too, because you're helping them think in different ways and involved in different ways in the meetings, which is only a good thing for your team moving forward. It's a good training mechanism as well. And like you said, the hybrid team, that's more of a reality. And I have been in some pretty darn horrible hybrid meetings where it's hard to hear. It's hard for, if I'm the virtual one, it's hard for me to get a word in edgewise and to share something when I do have something to say. And just all these dynamics that are really difficult. But if you have someone that's designated as the person responsible and in charge of making sure that the virtual people are engaged and involved, that takes pressure off the person running the meeting. Now you have, like you said, a co-facilitator, but you delegate and you spread it out. You spread out the responsibility. Everyone is more involved. Everyone's more engaged. They're more connected with and bought into the purpose of the meeting and getting, having a productive meeting. And it's just a win-win all the way around and across the board. Nothing that we've said here today is rocket science. It's all fairly straightforward. And anyone listening, you could do this today. You could do this tomorrow, your very next meeting. Have an agenda, have a clear stated purpose, assign roles, have people prepared in advance. Like all these things are things we should be doing each and every time. And if we do it, not only will our meetings be better, we're gonna waste less time and allow people to do their good work. We're gonna have better outcomes from our meetings and better thinking in our meetings. And I mean, it's just a no-brainer. We need to be doing this. And if we're not doing it, it's one of the quickest, easiest things we can do to up our leadership currency and to be seen as a really capable leader. In contrast, one of the quickest, easiest things you can do to undermine your credibility is to run crappy meetings over and over and over again and waste everybody's time.
Absolutely, yeah. One other one that I'm just going to quickly add, if you've got a moment, is what I call, it kind of follows on from that hold back thing. Introverts will process internally, extroverts externally. So if you fire out a question, of course, the extroverts are going to jump in there. Extroverts tend to dislike gaps in the conversation. So if the introvert's going, let me think about that, the conversation will get filled. So the next thing I often install is what I call, not for every single meeting, not for every single question, but what I put, write it. So again, it's nobody speaks for a minute, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever you name. You ask the question, everyone has to write down the main points of the answer. Now, trainers, of course, use this all the time because they get to write it on Post-it notes or sticky notes, and then you can stick it on the wall, and then the team can group up the thoughts. And that works really well. Again, it's another level of engagement. It's got the introverts now have had the time to slow down the pace of the meetings. The introverts have thought. Sometimes the very act of slowing it down means that the extroverts have added extra detail too. Win-win. And then if you go for the full-on spreading the bits of paper around the whiteboard thing, you've got another layer, you've got a bit of activity going on, so everyone's not just sitting down. But you don't have to do that. Even just then going around the room and getting everyone to read out their points can make a difference. And it structures the meeting. And that also plays well to the remote or the hybrid meeting thing, because you can do levels of that for those. So you could use something like Google Jamboard, where you all write your stuff up there, you rearrange it. People talk a lot about how wonderful the chat box is in Zoom meetings and all the rest of it. I'm not completely convinced by that. If it's used sparingly, I think you can do well. But when it's just full of a random supply of jumble, it's rubbish. So I'd steer a little bit away from the chat box. I would suggest using polls occasionally.
Yeah, well, I like those tips too. Yeah, I like those tips too. And the chat box thing, yes, it can be beneficial. And I I'm one who I like to think through what I'm going to say in a meeting. I like to be able to articulate it well. And so having a chat option sometimes is quite nice, because it allows me to actually write it out and really clarify what I'm thinking before I share it. That's not typically how I see the chat features used, though.
Absolutely.
Most of the time people are just saying random stuff, they're joking around, they're sharing memes, whatever. And I don't have a problem with levity in meetings, and if you want to share a funny meme in response to what's being talked about, whatever. But that's not like that's not the benefit of having the chat feature. So keep that in mind too, as we're running these virtual or hybrid meetings.
Some of the systems, like Adobe Connect, is a lovely system, but you can actually have different chat boxes running at the same time. So you can have your background chatter, but then you can have one specifically on a certain question. So you can get the benefits of both. And the other one that I like to play, which again works well with hybrid, is using something like Mentimeter. So it's a separate piece of software. Everyone can bring it up on their phone, mentimeter.com. And you ask the question, people put in one-word answers or two-word answers, and it creates a word cloud. So what you've then done, it's anonymous. So you haven't got this, oh, he said that and he said that, but you end up with a cloud. So the big words are the ones that people said a lot, the small ones are a few people said, and you can explore that as a group. But again, it's an extra piece of engagement, but the important piece is it allows the introverts to process, and everyone can then see what they're going to focus on. So that can join together the hybrid meetings as well.
Yeah, love it. I love it. Well, thank you, John. It has been a real pleasure talking with you. So many really great ideas and things to consider. Like we were discussing, it's not rocket science. Like, these are things that anyone can start doing right away, right now, make a very immediate, meaningful impact on your team dynamics, the quality of the work that's getting done, the productivity, creative thinking, etc. It's really something everyone should be doing. It's one of the first, like when I teach at the university, it's one of the first things I teach in a class. It doesn't really matter what class I'm teaching. If they're doing team-based work in the class, which many of the courses do, we talk about effective team meetings, because, if you don't have effective team meetings, guess what? The team's probably going to be dysfunctional. But when you have effective team meetings, that's like half the battle. And a lot of the other things start to resolve themselves. Well, John, thank you. Before we close today, I did want to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about what you're doing, and then just give us the final word on the topic for the day.
Okay, thank you. So you can find me on LinkedIn, where I'm John Baker, that's Jon, or go to the website, which is introvertsinbusiness, one word, .co.uk. That's easy to get hold of me. And one final word, I would say exactly as you said, meetings they're not rocket science. Don't try and create this perfect meeting, because you never will, but just keep making little steps. And the one final one I throw in, which joins everybody together at the end of the meeting, is get everyone to score it out of 5 or out of 10, whatever number you choose. And everyone just has to pick a number and how good was the meeting. And we do it when we've been diving. How good was my diving? Oh, it was a 7 today. We never question it unless they come in with a really low score, in which case what you then do is you focus and turn around and say, okay, Fred, what would have made the 5 become an 8? What one thing didn't work for you? Because now we're all learning from each other. And that, I think, is the final great thing about a team. If we can all learn together what works for each other, we're in a much, much better place.
Yeah, amen. Well said. Thank you, John. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what he can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. We are excited about the launch of HCI's new magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine designed to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Check out the first issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.